Halloween night had finally arrived, and my friends and I were determined to make it the spookiest yet. We were a group of fearless teenagers, armed with pillowcases for candy and the audacity to venture into the scariest parts of our town. There was this house a few blocks away from us that everybody knew about due to how creepy it was. That house would end up being our target for the night. As we roamed the dimly lit streets, we discussed all the different rumors we had heard about that house. We were aware it had been abandoned for years, but none of us knew exactly how long. Some people said they could hear noises like people talking or screaming coming from inside. Others said the house is definitely occupied by someone or something. Tonight, we were determined to find out what was behind those walls. The house turned out to be scarier than the rumors described. It was severely burned on the outside. We couldn't even tell what color it used to be because it was a charcoal black now. The windows were shattered and boarded up. The front gate had long since fallen apart. A twisted iron fence surrounded the property, and the yard was overgrown with weeds that reached out like fingers. As we approached the house, my heart started to race. I seriously wanted to turn back at that point, but I didn't want to look like a punk in front of my friends. We all exchanged nervous glances and decided to press on. After all, it was Halloween, and we craved the thrill of a good scare. We approached the front door, and to our surprise, it was already slightly open. The creaking hinges seemed to beckon us inside, and we couldn't resist. We stepped into the gloomy foyer, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The air inside was heavy, with the scent of age and decay. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind us, and we all jumped in terror. Panic set in as we realized we were trapped inside this scary house. Frantic attempts to push the door open were futile, as if someone was holding it firmly closed. As our hearts pounded, we heard faint whispers echoing through the hallways, beckoning us deeper into the house. The walls seemed to close in on us as we cautiously made our way through the shadowy corridors. Each step brought us closer to something malevolent, something that had been lurking in the darkness for far too long. In one room, we found a table set for a tea party, complete with dusty porcelain dolls that seemed to watch our every move. In another, we stumbled upon a collection of old cracked mirrors that distorted our reflections into grotesque figures. As we ventured deeper into the house, we came to a decrepit staircase leading to the basement. A flickering light lured us downward, and our curiosity got the better of us. The basement was damp and smelled of mildew, with a single dimly lit room at the end of the corridor. As we cautiously approached, we saw a figure huddled in the corner, its back to us. It was muttering incoherently, its voice a chilling mixture of anger and despair. I shined my light on the figure, and it slowly turned to reveal a disfigured face and a sinister smile that sent terror coursing through our veins. I shined my light on the figure, and it slowly turned to reveal a disfigured face and a sinister smile that sent terror coursing through our veins. Without warning, it lunged at us, its movements unnatural and grotesque. Panic set in as we fought for our lives, desperately crawling our way back up the stairs and towards the front door. We could hear the haunting laughter of the figure pursuing us, its malevolent presence closing in. Just as we reached the front door, it swung open, revealing the moonlit night outside. We stumbled onto the porch, gasping for breath, and the door slammed shut behind us once again. As we looked back at that house, we realized that whatever resided there was not done with us. It had allowed us to escape, but it knew we would never truly be free from its grasp. The chilling laughter echoed in our minds as we made our way back to the safety of the Halloween-lit streets, forever haunted by the night we dared to enter that house. Hey guys, it's me, Claire. I'm at home alone right now, narrating these stories, and I'm not gonna lie, it's kind of creepy. So, if you're enjoying so far, subscribe, become my friend, talk to me in the comments, and help me feel less alone. All right, let's get back to the stories. Bye! It was a typical Halloween night, and my wife Sarah and I were looking forward to our yearly tradition of passing out candy to the neighborhood kids. Our porch was adorned with cobwebs, carved pumpkins, and flickering candles, creating an eerie atmosphere that delighted all who dared to visit. Little did we know that this Halloween would take a sinister turn. As darkness settled in, we settled on the porch, a bowl of assorted candies in hand. The chill in the air was refreshing, and the distant howling in the wind added to the spookiness of the night. Children dressed as witches, vampires, and superheroes started trickling in with their parents. Our excitement grew as we greeted each little ghost and goblin, delighting in their squeals of joy when they received their treats. Then he appeared. A tall, lanky figure emerged from the shadows, his face hidden beneath a mask. The mask bore an eerie grin, its cracked and peeling paint revealing a maddening smile. He wore a tattered black coat that rustled in the wind, and I couldn't help but shiver as I handed him a piece of candy. His gloved hand brushed against mine, and it was ice cold. "Trick or treat," he whispered, his voice sending a shiver down my spine. It was a voice devoid of humanity, a whisper from the abyss. We tried to dismiss the unsettling feeling he left us with as just a part of the Halloween fun, but it lingered like a stubborn ghost. As he walked away, we noticed that he didn't join the other kids on their merry way. Instead, he stood across the street under a flickering lamppost staring at our house. I turned to Sarah. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice quivering. Sarah nodded, her eyes fixed on the bizarre figure. "Maybe he's just a teenager, trying to be creepy for Halloween." She tried to reassure me, but the unease in her voice was evident. With a sense of foreboding, we continued to hand out candy to the other children, but our eyes kept drifting back to the figure in black. He remained motionless in the dark. Hours passed, and most of the children had left with their bags of candy. It was well past bedtime for the little ones, but the figure in black continued to haunt us from his spot under the lamppost. Our concern grew as we realized he wasn't there for treats. He was there for something else entirely. "I'm going to call the police," Sarah finally said, her voice trembling. It was an unsettling decision to make on Halloween, but our fear was overpowering any thoughts of superstition. As Sarah reached for her phone, a sudden knock at the door made us both jump. We exchanged a worried glance, knowing we hadn't heard any footsteps approaching. The knock came again, louder this time. Slowly, I stood and cautiously approached the door. I peered through the peephole, but there was no one in sight. Just as I was about to dismiss it as a prank, the masked figure appeared in the peephole's view. My heart raced, and I stumbled back, gasping for air. "Open up." His chilling whisper reached me even through the door. The voice was menacing, and I could feel it crawling under my skin. "Call the police," I hissed to Sarah, who had paled at the sight of the masked stalker. I heard her dialing 911, her voice quivering as she explained our situation to the dispatcher. In the meantime, the relentless knocking continued, growing louder and more frantic with each passing moment. I knew we were running out of time. Desperation seized me, and I knew I had to confront this menace head on. I grabbed a heavy candlestick from the nearby table, my heart pounding in my chest. As I approached the door, the knocking stopped. For a moment, everything was eerily quiet. But then I heard the whisper again. "Open up, or you'll regret it." With a deep breath, I swung the door open, determined to face whatever horror lurked on the other side. But there was nothing there. The porch was empty, the masked figure gone. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The police arrived shortly after, taking our statement and reassuring us as they would patrol the area throughout the night. They had no leads, no clues about the strange figure in black. Sarah and I sat in our living room, clung to each other, our nerves frayed, and our sense of security shattered. As dawn broke and the first rays of sunlight crept through the windows, we thought we had escaped the clutches of the masked stalker, but we couldn't shake the feeling that he was out there, waiting in the shadows, ready to return on another Halloween night. Since that sinister Halloween, we moved to a different neighborhood, hoping to leave the nightmare behind. But every October 31st, as the air grows cooler and the wind howls in the night, we still find ourselves glancing out the window, fearing the return of the masked figure who haunted us, a memory that refuses to fade away. Halloween will never be the same for us, forever tainted by the chilling encounter with the unknown, reminding us that not all masks are meant for fun and games. On that fateful Halloween night, I found myself on a deserted road, far from civilization. The moon hung in the inky sky, casting an eerie glow upon the desolate landscape. The ominous howling of the wind seemed to whisper tales of ghosts and ghouls. A single thought consumed me: to escape this eerie night alive. My car had betrayed me, its engine sputtering to a stop in the heart of nowhere. Panic crawled at my chest, but there was no other choice. With trembling hands and a pounding heart, I ventured into the woods, guided only by the dim light of my flashlight. The trees seemed to close in around me, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, and the forest floor crackled with brittle leaves of countless autumns. It felt as though I had stepped into a different world, a world where the spirits of Halloween came to life. My flashlight flickered and died, leaving me surrounded in darkness. Desperation took hold, and I stumbled blindly forward, praying for a sanctuary. And then, as if by some stroke of fate, I came upon an old cabin. The cabin stood like a relic from a forgotten time, its time-worn wood and moss-covered roof painting a picture of abandonment. Desperation urged me forward, and with trembling hands, I pushed open the creaking door. The hinges groaned, as if warning me of the horror that lay within. My flashlight cast a dim glow on the interior. Shadows danced on the cabin's cracked walls, and the air was heavy with the scent of decay. Cobwebs hung like drapes, and dust-covered furniture gave the place an aura of abandonment. My breath quickened, and I hesitated, but my fear of the night outside drove me deeper into the cabin. As I moved through the gloom, a sense of dread took hold. It was then that I heard it, a sound that sent chills down my spine. A low, guttural growl, like nothing I had ever heard before. My heart raced, and I turned, shining my dying flashlight into the darkness. From the shadows, emerged a grotesque figure, a humanoid monster that defied description. Its skin was a sickly gray, stretched tight over a skeletal frame. Its eyes glowed with evil, piercing me with their intensity. A twisted grin revealed jagged, yellow teeth. I had stumbled into the lair of a monster. Fear surged through me, but I had no choice but to fight for my life. My flashlight fell from my trembling hand, and I searched desperately for a weapon. My fingers closed around a rusted pipe, and I gripped it with all my strength. The monster lunged, and instinct took over. I swung the pipe, striking it across the chest. It let out a defying, inhumane scream that reverberated through the cabin. The force of the blow sent it crashing into a rickety table, shattering it into pieces. With adrenaline coursing through my veins, I made a dash for the door, but the monster was not finished. It rose, its bones audibly cracking as it did. And with a speed that defied its grotesque form, it pursued me. I stumbled out into the night, my heart pounding, my breath ragged. The moonlight illuminated the path ahead, guiding me through the twisted woods. Every rustle, every creak of the forest seemed to be the monster approaching. I had to find safety, had to escape this nightmare. The cabin was now a distant memory, but the monster's presence lingered. Every rustle, every creak of the forest seemed to be the monster's approach. I had to find safety, had to escape this nightmare. The cabin was now a distant memory, but the monster's presence lingered, an unshakable terror. I could hear its growls in the wind, the whispers of the night conspiring against me. My desperate flight led me deeper into the woods, and I lost all sense of direction. Panic gnawed at the edges of my mind as exhaustion threatened to overtake me. It felt as though the very forest itself was alive, plotting to keep me within its grasp. Finally, when all hope seemed lost, I stumbled upon a clearing. Before me lay the road, my car in the distance. Relief washed over me, and I sprinted toward it, praying that it would start. The engine roared to life, and I sped away from that haunted place. As I left the cursed woods behind, I couldn't help but wonder if the cabin and the monstrous creature were part of some ancient, malevolent Halloween ritual. Or perhaps it was a sinister force that only dared to reveal itself on the darkest of nights. The memory of that Halloween still haunts me, a tale I recount with trepidation. I survived that night, but I can never be sure what horrors lurk in the shadows on Halloween's Eve, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to stumble into their grasp. I had been dating James for several months when he invited me to visit his parents' secluded cabin deep in the woods. He had spoken fondly of his family and the peaceful getaway, so I was excited to finally meet them. Little did I know that this visit would unravel a chilling tale of secrets and horror. We arrived at the cabin on a misty Friday evening. The cabin itself was quaint, nestled among towering trees that seemed to close in around it. As we entered, I couldn't help but notice the amount of tension that hung in the air. His parents greeted us with strained smiles, their eyes avoiding mine. I tried to dismiss it as nerves, but something felt off. "Hey, it's nice to finally meet you both. James talks about you all the time."
Does he now? We're glad you could join us," James's father said. His mother just stood there with a smile that seemed forced on her face.
"Thank you. This cabin is lovely. It's so secluded out here."
Yes, we cherish our privacy. It's peaceful. So, what do you both like to do for fun around here? I said, wondering if James's mother would say anything. We have our little hobbies. You know, collecting things. That sounds interesting. I guess everyone has their own interests. Yes. All right. I think I'll go freshen up. It was nice talking to you both. Yes, freshen up, rest well. As the evening wore on, their odd behavior became more apparent. They rarely spoke and seemed distant, almost as if they were hiding something. The atmosphere grew stiffening, and I found myself yearning for the safety of my own home. That night, I heard hushed voices outside my window. Curiosity getting the better of me, I peered out and saw James talking to his father. Their conversation was heated, and their gestures were frantic. Whatever they were discussing, they didn't want me to know. The following morning, I decided to take a walk around the property. I thought some fresh air might help shake off the unease that had settled over me. As I wandered, I stumbled upon an old shed tucked away behind some bushes. A strange intuition drew me closer, and as I opened the creaking door, my heart dropped. Inside the shed were shelves lined with jars. My stomach turned as I realized the jars contained human remains. There were teeth, eyes, hands, and even a human head. My mind raced, and I struggled to comprehend the horrifying scene before me. I began to feel my lunch starting to come up, but I didn't have time to get sick. My shock turned to panic when I heard footsteps approaching. I darted out of the shed and managed to find a hiding spot nearby. It was James, holding several empty glass jars. His parents joined him, their faces contorted with something that looked like twisted glee. They spoke in hushed tones about a deal they had made and how the jars were part of some dark ritual. My heart pounded as I realized I was in the presence of something sinister, something far beyond my understanding. I knew I had to leave, but the path back to the cabin was blocked by James and his parents. As they drew closer, I scrambled to my feet and ran deeper into the woods. The underbrush tore at my clothes and skin, but fear propelled me forward. After what felt like an eternity, I stumbled upon a small road and managed to hitch a ride back to town. Once I was safe, I contacted the police, sharing the horrifying truth I had uncovered. The investigation that followed uncovered a history of disturbing practices, cult-like rituals, and disappearances of several individuals over the years. James and his parents were arrested, their true nature exposed to the world. The experience left me shaken to my core, forever haunted by the memory of those jars and what James and his family may have had in store for me.
On Halloween night, I found myself alone in an old, decrepit hospital. The wind howled outside, and the full moon cast eerie shadows through the broken windows. The place had been abandoned for years, but I couldn't resist the temptation to explore it on the spookiest night of the year. As I walked down the dimly lit hallway, I could hear the faint creaking of rusty hospital beds. The air was thick, with a musty, long-forgotten odor that sent shivers down my spine. I had always been drawn to all things spooky and scary, and this place seemed like the perfect setting for my Halloween adventure. I made my way deeper into the hospital, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The only source of light came from my feeble flashlight, which flickered unpredictably. The flickering only added to the eerie atmosphere, making me feel as if the hospital itself was alive and breathing. The hospital was said to be haunted, and I couldn't help but wonder if I would encounter any ghosts or otherworldly spirits. But as I continued my exploration, it wasn't the supernatural that filled me with dread. It was the realization that I wasn't alone. From the shadows, a figure emerged. He was a man, or at least he appeared to be. His face was concealed by a grotesque mask, one that seemed to be made of a patchwork of animal hides. The mask had uneven, jagged openings for eyes, and through them I could see the glint of malevolence. My heart raced as I watched the masked man approach. His heavy, laboring breaths was the only sound in the hallway. I tried to speak, to ask him what he was doing here, but the words got stuck in my throat. He moved closer, and I could see that he was holding a rusty, blood-stained scalpel. I stumbled backwards, my flashlight slipping from my trembling hands. The room was plunged into darkness, and the man's eerie mask seemed to glow in a sinister light of its own. In that moment, I realized that I was trapped in a horror story of my own making. The man's raspy voice broke the silence. "You should have never come here," he hissed. The words sent chills down my spine, and I could feel the malevolent intent in his voice. I fumbled in the dark, searching for an escape. My fingers brushed against something cold and metallic, and I grasped it tightly. It was a discarded bedpan, not much of a weapon, but it was all I had. With the bedpan in hand, I made a break for it, sprinting down the hallway as fast as I could. The masked man pursued me, his heavy footsteps echoing behind me. The hospital seemed to stretch on forever, the walls closing in on me, and the air growing colder every step. I turned a corner and stumbled into a room, slamming the door shut behind me. It was a small, dimly lit space, filled with ancient medical equipment. I could hear the masked man's labored breathing on the other side of the door. I knew I couldn't stay in that room forever. I had to find a way out of the hospital and away from the man in the mask. I looked around for any means of escape and spotted a small window. It was high up on the wall, but I knew I had to try. I climbed onto a rusted gurney and managed to reach the window. I pushed it open and squeezed through, my heart pounding with fear. I found myself outside, standing in the hospital's overgrown courtyard. But the relief was short-lived. The masked man was now standing in the courtyard, his dark figure illuminated by the moonlight. He raised the scalpel, and I knew I had to run. I dashed through the tangled underbrush, my heart racing, and the man in the mask close in pursuit. The night seemed endless, and the trees looming like silent sentinels, and the wind howling like the tormented souls of the hospital's past. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I stumbled onto a narrow road. A car was approaching in the distance, and I waved frantically, hoping for salvation. The car screeched to a halt, and a kind-hearted stranger let me in. I blurted out my story, and they drove me to safety, away from the haunted hospital and the masked man. As I looked back at the hospital through the rearview window, I saw the masked man standing in the road, his mask an eerie, haunting silhouette in the moonlight. It was a Halloween night I would never forget. A night when my fascination with everything spooky and creepy had led me down a path of terror and survival. As I gazed at the masked man disappearing in the distance, I knew that the horror of that night would stay with me forever, a chilling reminder of the dangers that can lurk in the shadows of even the most mundane places. It's been years since that nightmarish Halloween. We were just a group of teenagers looking for a good laugh, never expecting the darkness that would follow. It all started with Mark, a shy and quiet introverted boy who had always been an easy target for bullies. His biggest fear was clowns, and we, a group of mean-spirited kids, decided to exploit that fear. Mark lived in a house on the corner of Rose Street, a gloomy place that seemed to have a permanent shadow hanging over it. His reclusive nature and fear of clowns had made him an outcast, and we saw him as the perfect target for our Halloween night prank. It wasn't enough to simply scare him. We wanted to traumatize him, to remind him of the torment he had endured. The plan was simple. We gathered at my house, and I volunteered to be the one to carry out the prank. I put on a creepy clown costume, complete with a white face, red nose, and a sinister smile. As I stood in the dimly lit street, I felt a strange thrill of excitement and dread. The night was chilly, and the moon cast eerie shadows, adding to the ominous atmosphere. With my heart pounding, I approached Mark's house and slipped into the shadows. My clown makeup concealed my identity, and I could barely see through the costume's oversized mask. I waited in the darkness, clutching a balloon filled with fake blood. My friends watched from a distance, eager to see Mark's reaction. As Mark's footsteps drew near, my pulse quickened, and I released the balloon, letting it burst with a loud pop. Mark let out a terrified scream, stumbling backwards, running for his front door. He tripped and fell face first onto the pavement. My friends erupted into laughter, but I was too focused on Mark's reaction to enjoy the moment. His terror was palpable, and it sent a shiver down my spine. It was then that I realized the true extent of the cruelty we had unleashed. That night haunted me, and my laughter turned to guilt. I couldn't shake the image of Mark's fear-stricken face as he stared at the menacing clown before him. It was an image that would forever be etched into my memory. The weeks following the prank, Mark disappeared from school, and his family claimed they were relocating to get away from the trauma he had endured. We had accomplished our goal. We had driven Mark away. But the satisfaction of our petty victory was short-lived. Years passed, and our lives continued. We had all moved on from that fateful Halloween night, but Mark's face still haunted my dreams. It was a constant reminder of the torment we had subjected him to, and I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. Then, one Halloween night, he returned. I was alone at my house, engrossed in an eerie horror movie playing on my TV, when I heard laughter drifting in from outside. At first, I brushed it off as a byproduct of the movie I was watching, my imagination running wild. But the sinister laughter persisted, growing louder and more demented with each passing moment. Goosebumps prickled my skin as I approached the window, curiosity mixed with fear. There, under the street lamp, stood a clown. Not just any clown, but an unsettling figure that seemed utterly out of place in our quiet suburban neighborhood. His mask concealed his face, making it impossible to discern his intentions or emotions. The sheer sight of him sent a shiver down my spine. I watched in silent dread as the clown began to approach my front porch. His slow, deliberate steps were enough to send a sense of unease deep into my gut. It was as if he knew something I didn't, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was after me. My heart pounded, and I knew I had to secure the house. With trembling hands, I locked all the doors and windows, the feeling of isolation and vulnerability creeping over me. The room seemed constricted, the shadows growing darker and the silence heavier. It was just me against the sinister clown, who now stood at my front door, tapping it lightly. The rhythmic, ominous tapping echoed through the house, setting my nerves on edge. With each tap, my imagination conjured up horrific scenarios. My mind raced, and I debated calling the police, but I feared taking my eyes off the clown. I decided to stand my ground, hoping he would eventually leave. Moments later, a loud crash reverberated through the house. My heart leaped into my throat as I realized the clown had forced his way inside. Panic overtook me, and I fumbled to find something, anything, to defend myself. My gaze darted around the room, finally landing on a heavy brass lamp. As the clown's heavy footsteps approached, I gripped the lamp as tight as I could. With a deep breath, I swung it with all my might, the metal crashing against the side of the intruder's head. He staggered back, his laughter now turning into an eerie, high-pitched cackle. I took the opportunity to flee, darting into the kitchen. The clown pursued me, his laughter and heavy footsteps following. I grabbed a kitchen knife, my trembling hand struggling to grip it firmly. He lunged at me, and I swung the knife, narrowly missing his masked face. Our struggle was frantic, a terrifying dance of survival and madness. In the midst of the chaos, I managed to grab the edge of the clown's mask, and with a fierce tug, I ripped it off. As the mask fell to the floor, my heart stopped. Staring back at me was a face I recognized all too well. It was Mark. Tears welled in my eyes as confusion and disbelief washed over me. Mark had invaded my house and was terrorizing me, just as I had done him all those years ago. He was still laughing, his voice twisted and manic. "Mark, please don't," I pleaded, hoping he would stop, but knowing I didn't deserve his mercy. He didn't respond. Mark's eyes, once familiar and warm, were now cold and hollow. It was as if he had been consumed by a malevolent force, a darkness that had taken hold of him. I knew I had to escape. With every ounce of strength left, I pushed Mark away and sprinted towards the front door. I reached it and glanced back one last time, seeing Mark standing there, his clown mask on the floor, his laughter haunting the air. I burst out of the house and into the chilling night, gasping for breath. The clown was behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I could feel his presence, his laughter echoing in my ears, even as I ran through the dimly lit streets of our once peaceful neighborhood. The horror I had witnessed was beyond anything I could have ever imagined, a surreal nightmare brought to life. On the night of Halloween, the moon hung low and pale in the sky, casting a silvery glow over the rural farming community of Willowbrook. The streets were lined with pumpkins, their flickering candlelight a beacon of warmth and comfort against the darkness that loomed. Children dressed as witches, superheroes, and ghouls ran from house to house, their laughter a joyful contrast to the eerie quiet of the countryside. It was a night like any other Halloween in Willowbrook, or so I thought. But little did I know, the sinister scarecrow, a malevolent figure that had haunted our town for generations, was about to make its presence known once more. As a lifelong resident of Willowbrook, I had heard the stories of the scarecrow since I was a child. The legends claim that it was created decades ago by an eccentric farmer who had dabbled in dark, forbidden arts to protect his crops. The scarecrow was said to have a sinister life of its own, fueled by the farmer's malevolent intent. According to the tales, the scarecrow would only come to life on Halloween night, seeking out souls to feed its insatiable hunger. While most of us regarded these stories as nothing more than superstition, there were those in the town who swore they had witnessed the scarecrow moving of its own accord on Halloween night. It was a creepy tradition in Willowbrook for the bravest souls to venture out and search for the scarecrow during the darkest hours of the holiday, hoping to glimpse the malevolent figure. This Halloween, my friends and I decided to take on the challenge. We were teenagers now, and the tales of the sinister scarecrow were nothing more than spooky legends to us. Armed with our flashlights, we set out on our eerie adventure, determined to debunk the folklore that had terrified generations of Willowbrook's children. Our journey led us through moonlit fields, past barns and cornfields, and eventually to the edge of the forest that bordered the town. The night was still, and the only sound was the rustling of the leaves in the chilly breeze. Our flashlights cut through the darkness like thin beams of hope. As we entered the forest, a sense of foreboding settled over us. The tall trees cast long, shadowy fingers that reached out to touch us. The deeper we ventured into the woods, the more our unease grew. It was as though the air itself had thickened, carrying an unsettling aura. After what felt like hours, we stumbled upon a clearing, and there, standing amidst the moonlight, was the sinister scarecrow. It was a disturbing sight to see, its tattered clothes hanging in ragged shreds. Its straw-stuffed body swayed eerily in the breeze, and its pumpkin head, carved with a malevolent grin, cast an eerie glow. We exchanged nervous glances and whispered theories about how someone had probably placed the scarecrow there to keep up Halloween tradition. We were skeptics, after all. But as we approached the scarecrow, my flashlight flickered, casting the figure in a ghostly light. Suddenly, with a creaking of weathered wood and rustling straw, the scarecrow came to life. Its head turned to face me, and I found myself locked in its malevolent gaze. Panic surged through me, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. The scarecrow's eyes seemed to glow with an outer-worldly light. As the scarecrow reached out its hand, I felt a wave of cold dread wash over me. I stumbled back, my heart pounding, and my friends let out terrified cries. The scarecrow advanced, its steps awkward yet deliberate, as if it had been waiting for us. In a desperate bid to escape, we scattered in different directions, but the scarecrow was relentless, pursuing each of us with unnatural speed. It seemed to be everywhere at once, an embodiment of our deepest fears. One by one, the scarecrow caught up to each of my friends, their terrified screams echoing through the forest. I could do nothing but watch in horror as they were dragged towards the malevolent figure, their struggles futile against its unnatural strength. I knew I had to find a way to escape this nightmare, but the sinister scarecrow was closing in on me. With every step, it seemed to grow larger, more grotesque, and more threatening. It was as though it fed on our fear, growing stronger with each passing moment. Desperation drove me deeper into the woods, but the scarecrow was relentless. The moon was now hidden behind a shroud of clouds, plunging the forest into impenetrable darkness. My flashlight was long gone, and I stumbled blindly through the trees. As I ran, I could hear the malevolent laughter of the scarecrow, a chilling sound that filled me with dread. It seemed to taunt me, to mock my feeble attempts at escape. The night was endless, and the forest was a maze of confusion. Finally, when I was on the brink of exhaustion, I stumbled out of the woods and onto a moonlit field. The town of Willowbrook lay in the distance, its lights a welcoming sight. With every ounce of strength left in me, I sprinted towards safety, leaving the scarecrow behind. The scarecrow had vanished, but the terror it instilled in me remained. Willowbrook had been forever changed that Halloween night. The sinister scarecrow was no longer just a legend. It was a malevolent reality. And as long as the moon still casts its silvery light on Halloween, the people of Willowbrook will live in fear of the sinister scarecrow's return, a reminder that some legends are born of the darkest of truths. Halloween was my favorite time of the year, the one night when you could be anyone or anything you wanted, where the streets filled with witches, superheroes, and monsters of all kinds. But I had a reputation to uphold. I was the girl who always had the best and scariest costume at our annual Halloween party, and I couldn't let this year be an exception. As October rolled around, I began scouring thrift stores and costume shops in search of the perfect outfit. My determination led me to a dusty, forgotten thrift store tucked away in a quiet corner of town. The store had an outer-worldly aura, its shelves lined with discarded possessions of strangers. That's where I found it, a costume that sent shivers down my spine. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. It was so realistic. The outfit appeared to be an intricate zombie ensemble, complete with tattered clothing, decaying flesh, and ghastly wounds. It was a work of art, or rather, a work of terror. I couldn't believe my luck. I had discovered a hidden gem in the sea of discarded clothes. The costume felt strangely real as I tried it on. The latex mask clung to my face, and the fabric of the clothing melted with my skin, creating an eerie sensation of being one with the costume. It was perfect. The scare factor was off the charts, and I knew it would make me the star of the Halloween party. The evening of the party arrived, and I couldn't wait to unveil my horrifying creation. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I pulled on the costume and observed myself in the mirror. The transformation was complete. My face was now a grotesque, rotting visage, and the clothes clung to me as if I were a genuine reanimated corpse. With a sense of satisfaction, I headed to the party. The reactions were everything I had hoped for. My friends were a mixture of awe and terror as they looked at me. The costume had exceeded my wildest expectations, and I reveled in the gasps and screams of delight. Throughout the night, I danced and socialized, the costume becoming a part of me, both physically and emotionally. I was a zombie, a creature of the night, and I reveled in the sensation of embodying a character straight from the pages of a horror novel. As the party continued, I began to notice something strange. The costume was no longer just something I was wearing. It had become a part of me in a way that defied explanation. The latex mask was no longer a mask. It was my face. The clothing wasn't just clothing. It was my skin. Panic began to set in as I realized I couldn't remove the costume. Desperation and fear welled up as I struggled to peel off the mask, but it was futile. It was as if the costume had merged with my flesh. My hands tore at the fabric, my nails scratching at the latex, but the mask remained attached to my face, the illusion of rot and decay becoming an eerie reality. My friends, who had initially been impressed by my costume, now watched in horror as I attempted to free myself. Their laughter turned to concern, and they tried to help, but nothing could separate the mask from my skin. As the night wore on, I grew increasingly fatigued, the weight of the costume pressing down on me. The fabric clung to my body, my movements hampered by the latex mask. It was as if I had become a true zombie, trapped in an eternal night of Halloween. In a fit of desperation, I fled the party and returned to the thrift store where I had found the cursed costume. The old store felt colder and darker, the shelves filled with eerie silence. The shopkeeper, a mysterious figure with eyes like shadows, looked at me knowingly. "I see you've discovered the costume's secret," he said, his voice a low, haunting whisper. "It comes at a price, you know." Tears welled in my eyes, and I begged him for a solution, but he offered no assistance. The costume had become a part of me, and I was now bound to it. There was no escape. With heavy steps, I left the thrift store, my heart heavy with the weight of my predicament. I was now condemned to walk the earth as a zombie, a creature of horror and decay. The Halloween night that had once brought me joy had become a never-ending nightmare. As the years passed, I roamed the streets, my appearance terrifying all who crossed my path. I became a legend, a living nightmare, the girl who couldn't remove her Halloween costume. The seasons changed, and I remained trapped in a perpetual Halloween, forever the embodiment of fear and the unknown. My life was now a twisted version of the Halloween fantasy I had once embraced. The costume that had once been a source of pride had become my curse, and I was fated to wander the world as a living zombie, a symbol of the terrifying power of Halloween. This happened when I was a 19-year-old college student. I was looking to make some extra cash, and babysitting seemed like an easy way to do it. Little did I know that this particular babysitting gig would lead me to the most terrifying experience of my life. The Johnsons, a seemingly normal suburban family, had two adorable children, Emily, a 4-year-old, and Daniel, a 10-year-old. Their house was a quaint 2-story home nestled at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. It appeared welcoming enough. Mrs. Johnson's voice on the phone was polite and friendly as she explained the details of the job. "Please arrive at 7 p.m. sharp," she said. "The kids are easy to handle, and they'll be in bed by 9 p.m. We should be back by midnight. Oh, and I almost forgot. Emily has a teddy bear named Mr. Eccles. If you hear her talking about Mr. Eccles, she's referring to her bear." Sweet, I thought. I agreed to all of the details of the job and arrived promptly at 7 p.m. The Johnsons gave me a quick tour of their house, introducing me to the kids and assured me that everything would be fine. I felt a sense of reassurance as I watched them leave. As the evening wore on, Emily and Daniel played quietly in the living room, and I prepared dinner for them. As I cooked, my eyes kept darting to a door in the kitchen that led to the basement. I wasn't sure why I was so curious about that door, but I dismissed it as nerves and continued making dinner. I followed Mrs. Johnson's recipe to the T. I really wanted this family to like me, and hopefully I would become their full-time babysitter. Around 9 p.m., I led the kids upstairs to their bedrooms and tucked them into bed. As I turned to leave Emily's room, she whispered, "Could you say goodnight to Mr. Eccles?" I directed my attention to the teddy bear Emily held close to her chest. "Sure. Good night, Mr. Eccles." "He can't hear you from all the way up here, silly." I wasn't sure what she meant by that. So I left her room and began to close the door as she slowly started to close her eyes. As I descended down the staircase, I thought to myself, I've got to be the luckiest person on earth to have bagged this job. The kids are well behaved. The pay is 3 times the average rate for babysitters. The house is gorgeous, and the fridge is stocked. I am so lucky. But I should have known that if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. Before I made my way to the living room to watch a movie on their huge 85-inch LED TV, I stopped by the fridge to grab a snack. Beside the fridge was that door that led to the basement, and it was slightly open. I was pretty sure it was closed before I went upstairs. My curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to open the door and look inside. Mrs. Johnson never showed me this part of the house, but then again, why would she? It's not like I needed anything down there. So, me being nosy, I opened the door all the way, and to my surprise, the basement was a stark contrast to the rest of the house. While the whole house gave luxury and modern, the basement looked exactly how old creepy basements look in the movies. There was a long set of wooden stairs that looked so old, if I were to step on them, they may have caved in. The stairs led down into darkness. I also heard some dripping and slight rumbling down there. It smelled like mildew, so I shut the door and wished I'd never opened it to begin with. After that, I took my snacks and headed to the living room. I plopped on their huge sofa and decided to text Mrs. Johnson. The kids are so well behaved. They've had dinner, brushed their teeth, and now they're in bed. Thank you. We really appreciate everything you've done tonight, and we'll be home in about an hour or so. Nice. All I had left to do was kick back and watch some TV. I must have dozed off because the next time I opened my eyes, Emily was standing right in front of me. She scared the crap out of me, by the way. "I forgot to give Mr. Eccles a glass of water. I always give him a glass of water before bed." "Oh, okay, sure. Let's get you some water and get you back to bed." I followed her into the kitchen and watched her as she grabbed a glass from the dishwasher. She then climbed on her stool and filled it up with tap water. Once she was finished, I expected her to head back upstairs, but instead, she climbed down from her stool with the glass in hand and walked to the basement door. In fear of her falling down the basement staircase, I raced over to her and grabbed her arm before she could open the door. "What are you doing? You can't go down there." "But this is where Mr. Eccles lives." "No, Mr. Eccles is your teddy bear, right? He's upstairs, isn't he?" "No, this is Mr. Eccles." Emily opened the door, and I was terrified at what I'd seen. There was what looked like a man standing right behind the door, waiting. He was tall and skinny. His arms were unnaturally long, hanging below his knees. His skin was stretched so tightly across his face, causing his teeth to protrude outwards and his eyes to bulge. Now, some people think I ought to be ashamed of the thing I did next, but I'm not. My fight or flight instincts kicked in, and I immediately booked it towards the front door, leaving Emily and her brother behind. All I could think of was getting out of that house to safety. I made it to the neighbor's house, and I pounded on their door until someone answered. I used their phone to call 911, and officers arrived about 5 minutes later. The kids were okay, and the officers led the man out in cuffs. I noticed the officers kept giving me dirty looks and asking me over and over, Did you leave the kids in the house when you called us?" "Yes," I answered. "Why did you leave them?" "I was afraid," I said. It was as simple as that. I didn't get why they didn't understand. A few days had passed, and of course I was fired from my babysitting gig, which is understandable. As a parent, you would expect the sitter to put their life on the line for your kids. And I found out that night that maybe I'm not cut out to be a babysitter. As far as the man in the basement, he was the son of the previous owners of the house. His mother and father passed away in a car accident, and their son was pronounced missing. Well, come to find out, he had been living in the basement for 3 years with the Johnsons completely unaware, except for little Emily. He was extremely malnourished and needed medical attention. He also had a mental disability that caused his mind to operate at a 5-year-old's level. Emily had become a friend to the man, and she was distraught when he was taken away. So, this is the end of my terrifying babysitting experience. But tell me, what would you have done? Would you have taken off like I did, or would you have risked your life for theirs? Hey guys, it's me, Claire. So something super crazy and like spooky happened to me the other night. I couldn't wait to upload this video so I could tell you guys. So this is going to be a personal story time. So if you want to skip this and get back to the stories of the video, I'll leave a timestamp here for you. So remember my last video, I was telling you guys how like creepy my apartment complex is, right? So last night, something happened that just proves exactly what I was talking about. So last night, the time was about 10 o'clock. I had just finished making dinner for myself. So I'm sitting on the couch, just, watching TV. And all of a sudden, I hear somebody knocking at my door. Immediately, I get anxious and paranoid because nobody's supposed to be at my house. So I kind of sit there like quietly and just wait to see if they're going to knock again. And they do. This time the knocks are like a little harder, a little louder. So I walk up to the door and I ask who it is. And a male voice on the other side is like, "Hey, it's your neighbor. Can I use your Wi-Fi?" So through the door, he's telling me that he needs to get an Uber really quick because I guess his girlfriend kicked him out of the house and he needs a ride or whatever the case. At this point, I couldn't care less. I just want him away from my door. So I tell him, I'm sorry, I don't have Wi-Fi because I'm not going to open the door and give you my... First of all, who does that? Like, is that a thing? Because this is the second time someone has come to my door, a stranger, and asked to use my Wi-Fi password or asked if they could have my Wi-Fi password. Not at this apartment complex, but at my other apartment complex. Same exact situation happened. So, like, is this a thing that people are doing? I don't know, whatever. So anyway, I tell the guy, no, I don't have Wi-Fi, sorry. So I'm assuming he walks away, but my creepy apartments, we're supposed to have a light next to our front door, like a porch light. The lights are out. So even if I wanted to see what this guy looked like, I can't even look out my peephole because the lights are out. I can't see anything out there. And I don't have a Ring camera, unfortunately. But anyways, I was just thinking, like, I literally tell them that my apartments are like kind of spooky and then something spooky happens literally last night. But on this topic, actually, I was kind of curious. What do you guys do if somebody unexpected comes knocking at your door? Do you guys stay silent and just kind of see if they'll keep knocking or if they'll eventually go away? Or do you make yourself known? Because in my mind, I'm thinking, if this is a robber and I make myself known, then maybe they won't want to rob me because there's a high chance I could call the police and they could get caught. But if I stay silent, then that gives them the green light to go ahead and rob the place because it seems like it might be no one home. I mean, I watch too many Ring camera videos. I watch way too many crazy videos. So that's just what I think. What do you guys do? Leave me a comment down below. Do you make yourself known or do you stay silent? Which one? But anyway, I'm like this because I've had so many crazy, dangerous experiences living alone. I've literally had a stranger come into my house twice. Twice. I've had somebody try to break. You know what? I can actually give you guys another story time next video if you're interested. If you're interested in another personal story time, then tell me down below in the comments. Just say story time or personal story time down below in the comments so that I know that you guys want to hear this. If you don't, then you just don't have to put anything. But enough of my rambling. I could go on and on. But yeah, if you guys enjoyed the first story, the one about the babysitter and the guy in the basement, then subscribe. We have more stories to come. And talk to me down below in the comments. Talk to me. Help me feel less alone. Because you guys know I record these videos when everybody's out of the house and I'm by myself. And it is low-key kind of scary. So comment down below. Talk to me. I talk back. And yeah, let's move on to the next set of stories. And I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city, I found myself in a dimly lit cafe, waiting for a man I had met online. The prospect of a Tinder date had filled me with both excitement and trepidation, but nothing could have prepared me for the chilling encounter that was about to unfold. His name was Victor, or so he claimed, and he had a profile that had piqued my interest. He described himself as an avid traveler, having been to all the countries and historical structures I could only dream of. But the man who walked through the cafe's door bore little resemblance to the pictures he had posted online. Victor was a tall, lanky figure with disheveled hair and a sardonic smile that would creep anyone out. He approached the table with an air of arrogance, not bothering to extend a courteous greeting. Instead, he launched into a story about his most recent travels, speaking of haunted places and cursed artifacts with a disturbing enthusiasm. His demeanor was off-putting, to say the least. He seemed to revel in my unease, pausing only to sip his espresso with an unnerving intensity. I tried to steer the conversation towards safer topics, but he deftly circled back to the tales of death and despair. "Have you ever thought about the fragility of life?" he asked, his eyes fixed on me with an unsettling intensity. "How easily it can all come crashing down." I couldn't suppress a shiver at his words, but I attributed it to the odd atmosphere of the cafe. I excused myself to the restroom, hoping to collect my thoughts and consider whether I should endure the rest of this date. Upon returning to our table, I found Victor engrossed in conversation with the waiter. He was disturbing the poor man with a gruesome tale of murder that had occurred in this very cafe where we sat. The waiter's face had gone pale, and I could see the desperation in his eyes as he tried to escape Victor's creepy storytelling. I cut in, urging Victor to drop the unsettling anecdotes and change the subject. He reluctantly agreed, but insisted on ordering dessert. With each passing minute, his behavior grew increasingly erratic. He rambled about his obsession with vintage knives, regaled me with stories of haunted dolls, and insisted that he had a collection of human skulls in his apartment. Enough was enough. I decided to end the date, but as I made my excuses and prepared to leave, Victor's reaction sent a chill down my spine. His sardonic smile twisted into a menacing grin, and he grabbed my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Leaving so soon," he whispered, his breath cold against my ear. "I was hoping we could continue this conversation." I yanked my hand free and fled the cafe, my heart racing. I could feel Victor's eyes on my back as I stepped out into the night, and I knew that the ordeal was far from over. I hailed a cab, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. I instructed the driver to take me home, but as we weaved through the streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Glancing out of the window, I saw a shadowy figure in the distance, keeping pace with the cab. It was Victor. Panic set in, and I frantically instructed the cab driver to speed up and take an alternate route, hoping to lose my pursuer. The man in the car behind us maintained his pursuit, never once letting me out of his sight. As we approached my apartment building, my heart sank. I couldn't lead this man to where I lived. I instructed the driver to drop me off a block away from my building, hoping to throw off my stalker. With trembling hands, I paid the fare, thanked the driver, and stepped out onto the dimly lit street. I crept through the alleys and side streets, trying to stay out of sight, but Victor was relentless. He was hot on my trail, and his laughter echoed through the night. Finally, I reached my apartment building and sprinted up the stairs, fumbling for my keys. Just as I managed to unlock the door and slip inside, I heard the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Victor was closing in. Terrified, I locked the door behind me, but I knew it wouldn't be enough to keep him out. I had to call the police. As I dialed 911, I could hear his taunting voice through the door. "I know you're in there," he sneered. "You can't escape me." I relayed my address to the dispatcher, and then a deafening crash filled the apartment. Victor had broken down the door, and there he stood, a manic gleam in his eyes and a crowbar in hand. The dispatcher could hear my frantic pleas for help, and she assured me that officers were on their way. I retreated into the apartment, desperately searching for any means of defense. My trembling hands found a heavy bookend, and I clutched it like a lifeline. Victor advanced, his steps deliberate and predatory. But as he came closer, his bravado wavered, and I could see the fear in his eyes as he realized he might not be the one in control. The police arrived just in time, their sirens wailing as they stormed into the apartment. Victor was apprehended, and as they led him away in handcuffs, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. But the terror of that night would linger. I had underestimated the darkness that could dwell in the heart of a stranger, and I knew that the memory of Victor's chilling obsession would haunt me for the rest of my days. It was a lesson learned the hard way. Sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones that walk among us. Growing up, I lived in a cozy suburban house with my parents. My dad often worked late hours, leaving me and my mom home alone most evenings. It was during my final year of high school that things took a chilling turn. One evening, around 8 p.m., my dad headed to work as usual. I settled into my routine, spending time on my computer and unwinding after a long day. My mom and I were accustomed to being alone during these evenings, so there was nothing unusual about that night. However, around 10 p.m., I thought I heard a faint sound coming from downstairs. It was like a distant creaking or shuffling noise. Instantly, I brushed it off, thinking it might be the house settling or just my imagination playing tricks on me. I turned up the volume on my computer game and continued to distract myself. But as time went on, the sounds persisted and grew more distinct. It was as if someone was moving around downstairs. Feeling a little uneasy, I muted my game and strained my ears to listen. The creaking seemed to be coming from the living room and the kitchen area. My heart started to beat a bit faster, and a sense of anxiety crept over me. I knew my mom was out visiting a friend, so it couldn't be her. As the minutes ticked by, the noises became more unsettling. It was like someone was cautiously moving around, taking slow steps, and occasionally knocking into things. I realized that it wasn't just the house settling. Someone was definitely down there. I reached for my phone and sent a text to my mom, asking if she had come back home without me realizing it. Her reply was quick and confirmed my fear. She was still at her friend's place. I felt a knot in my stomach as I considered the possibility of an intruder. I tried to convince myself that maybe it was just a pet or some outside noise, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. I tiptoed to my bedroom door and locked it quietly, not wanting to alert whoever might be downstairs. Listening from behind my locked door, I could hear the shuffling growing louder and closer. It sounded like whoever it was had moved from the living room to the hallway, and I could hear faint murmurs and whispers. Fear coursed through my veins as I realized there was more than one person down there. I debated calling the police, but a part of me worried that making a call might draw attention to myself. Instead, I picked up my 10-pound dumbbell I had left on the floor a few days ago and waited in silence, my heart pounding in my ears. The minutes felt like hours as the sounds of movement continued. Eventually, the footsteps reached the stairs, and I held my breath. I could hear them creeping up the staircase, slow, deliberate steps. I tightened my grip on the dumbbell, ready to defend myself if needed. My mind raced, and I considered my options. Just as the footsteps reached the top of the stairs, they suddenly stopped. The house was eerily silent. I held my breath, listening for any sign of movement. Time seemed to stand still. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the sound of footsteps retreating. The intruders were leaving. I stayed locked in my room, my heart racing until I was certain they were gone. Eventually, I mustered the courage to venture out of my room. I cautiously made my way downstairs, turning on lights as I went, illuminating the dark corners of the house. Everything appeared to be undisturbed, but the feeling of violation lingered in the air. I double-checked the locks on all the doors and windows, ensuring my safety. The incident left me shaken for days. I reported the incident to the police, but there were no immediate leads or suspects. The unsettling feeling of someone invading my home stayed with me, a reminder that even the most familiar places can become the setting for something truly chilling. I never expected to find myself in this situation, but life has a way of leading you down uncharted paths. When I moved into the old fixer-upper I had purchased, I had no idea of the horrors that awaited me within its decaying walls. The real estate agent had mentioned that the basement was locked, but I had no inkling of the secrets it held. The house had been abandoned for years, left to deteriorate like a forgotten relic of the past. I was drawn to it for its historical charm and the promise of solitude, a retreat from the bustling city. My plan was to fix it up and make it my own, a place where I could find peace and inspiration. The first few weeks were uneventful. I spent my days painting walls, refinishing floors, and exploring the overgrowing garden. But at night, as I lay in my creaking bed, I would hear strange sounds within the house. At first, I dismissed them as mere echoes of the past or a product of an aging structure. But as days turned into weeks, I couldn't deny the reality that something was wrong. One night, I heard it, a distinct shuffling sound coming from below. It was the basement. I couldn't ignore it any longer. The urge to unlock the door and investigate grew stronger with each passing night. What could possibly be causing this disturbance? Curiosity got the better of me, and I searched the house for the key to the basement. After rummaging through drawers and cabinets, I finally found it in the dusty attic. It was an old iron key, cold to the touch. I couldn't help but feel frightened and panicked as I descended the creaky stairs into the darkness below. The basement was damp and cold, filled with an eerie stillness. My flashlight's feeble beam revealed dusty shelves, forgotten trinkets, and an assortment of old furniture covered with white sheets. But what caught my eye was the corner, where an old wooden door stood slightly open. It was the source of the noise, and I pushed it open hesitantly. There, in the dim light, I saw a makeshift bed, blankets, and clothes scattered about. My heart raced as I realized someone had been living here. It was not just a random squatter. It was evident that this was someone's home. Fear gripped me as I considered the implications of sharing my newfound residence with a stranger. The following days were filled with dread and paranoia. I inspected the locks on doors and windows, installed security cameras, and even contacted the police, but they couldn't find any evidence of unauthorized entry. I was trapped in a living nightmare, wondering if I was slowly losing my grip on reality. Then, things started to go missing. Small items at first, a bracelet, a book, a vase. I questioned my own memory, attributing it to stress or forgetfulness. But it escalated. My treasured family heirlooms, jewelry, and even some cash disappeared without a trace. There was no sign of a break-in, no explanation. I couldn't escape the feeling that someone was watching my every move. Each night, the sounds from the basement grew louder and more disturbing. I could hear muffled voices, whispering, and sometimes arguing. I knew I had to confront the intruder, but fear held me back. What if this person was dangerous? What if my attempt to resolve the situation only made it worse? One fateful evening, I mustered the courage to descend into the basement. I was met with a chilling sight. There, in the corner of the room, was a homeless man, huddled in tattered blankets. His eyes were vacant, and his face was covered in dirt and stubble. The room reeked of stale sweat and desperation. For a moment, we stared at each other in silence. His presence sent shivers down my spine. Then, with a hint of madness in his eyes, he spoke. "You can't get rid of me. This is my home. I've been here for years." I took a step back, my heart pounding. He was the source of the noises, the missing items, and the creeping terror that had consumed my life. I had unknowingly shared my home with this stranger, and I was left with the horrifying realization that I had become a prisoner in my own house. Desperation overcame me as I realized that I needed to escape. I called the police, my voice trembling, and begged them to hurry. They arrived, and after a tense confrontation, they apprehended the man and led him away in handcuffs. They assured me that he would be dealt with, and I could finally reclaim my home. The relief was short-lived, though. The damage had been done. My once beloved house was forever tainted by the horrors I had endured. I moved out, unable to shake the memories of that dreadful time. The experience left me scared, forever haunted by the realization that even in the most mundane of places, the unimaginable can happen. And also, what was once my pride and joy stands abandoned once more, a silent witness to the sinister secrets hidden within its walls, and a testament to the darkness that can lurk in the most unexpected corners of our lives. As the rain poured outside, I hailed an Uber to get home after a late-night work event. The driver, a seemingly ordinary man, greeted me with a polite smile. I settled into the back seat, feeling a sense of comfort in the familiar glow of the interior lights. Little did I know, this would be the start of a chilling encounter. As the car cruised through the darkened streets, the driver engaged me in a friendly conversation. His questions grew more personal, probing about my life, my schedule, my interests. Unease tickled the back of my mind, but I brushed it off, attributing it to exhaustion. As we neared my apartment, I directed him to turn left. However, he calmly ignored my instructions, continuing down an unfamiliar road. Panic set in as I demanded an explanation. He responded with an eerie smile, claiming it was a shortcut he knew well. Heart pounding, I realized I was trapped in a confined space with a stranger who seemed to have his own sinister plans. I tried to stay composed, urging him to turn back, but his demeanor grew more unsettling. He began to recount intimate details of my life, things I had never shared with anyone. My mind raced, desperately trying to understand how he could know such things. His obsession with me was becoming chillingly apparent. Desperation took hold as I fumbled for my phone, fingers trembling as I dialed 911. But to my horror, he glanced in the rearview mirror and said, "I wouldn't do that if I were you." He knew my every move, my every thought. It was as if he could anticipate my actions before I even took them. Minutes stretched into an eternity. As we drove through the darkened streets, the tension in the air growing thicker with each passing second. My heart pounded in my chest, and my breath came in ragged gasps. I pleaded with him to let me go, promising not to tell anyone about this nightmarish encounter. Finally, he pulled over to the side of the road, his smile never wavering. He turned to me, his eyes gleaming with a manic intensity, and whispered, "Remember, I'll always be watching." With that, he unlocked the doors and I stumbled out of the car, my legs weak and shaky. As I rushed home and bolted the door behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that his presence lingered. Every shadow seemed to conceal his figure, every creak of the floorboards an echo of his laughter. I knew that this wasn't the end, that his obsession would continue to haunt me. And so, I lived in constant fear, looking over my shoulder, wondering if he's still out there, waiting, watching, and obsessed. Weeks had passed since that harrowing night with the Uber driver, but the fear hadn't subsided. Every time I stepped out of my apartment, I felt an invisible presence lurking in the shadows. My once vibrant life had been reduced to paranoid glances over my shoulder and sleepless nights. One evening, as I walked home from work, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. The street was nearly deserted, and the sound of my footsteps echoed eerily. My heart raced, and I quickened my pace, trying to shake off the sensation. I glanced around, and my blood turned to ice when I spotted a familiar face in the crowd. It was him, the Uber driver. He stood across the street, his gaze locked onto mine. Panic surged through my veins, and I broke into a run, my breath hitching with each desperate step. I ducked into a nearby coffee shop, my heart pounding like a drum. As I caught my breath, I realized I needed to take action. I contacted the police, explaining the situation and providing them with every detail I could remember. They assured me that they would investigate, but deep down, I feared he would slip through their fingers, just as he had before. Days turned into weeks, and I began to let my guard down slightly, hoping that maybe he had moved on. But then, one evening, as I walked through a dimly lit park, a hand suddenly clamped over my mouth, and I was pulled into the shadows. My heart raced as I struggled against my captor, but my efforts were futile. The darkness seemed to swallow me whole, and I was face to face with the driver once again. His smile was manic, his grip unrelenting. He whispered tauntingly, "You can't escape me." Fear turned into fury as I fought back with every ounce of strength I could muster. Our struggle was fierce and desperate, and I managed to break free, stumbling backward. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, and I sprinted away, my breath coming in ragged gasps. This time, I didn't hesitate to involve the police. With a renewed determination, they launched an intensive search for the man who had terrorized me for far too long. It took time, but eventually they apprehended him, and he was brought to justice. Though the nightmare had finally ended, its impact remained. I had faced my deepest fears and emerged stronger, but the scars ran deep. Every car ride, every late-night walk would forever carry a shadow of that chilling encounter. And as I looked out into the world, I knew that darkness could exist in the most ordinary of places. I had been looking forward to this vacation for months. A quiet, secluded hotel in the mountains, far away from the hustle and bustle of the city. The promise of peace and solitude was exactly what I needed. As I checked into the quaint old hotel, little did I know that my idea of a peaceful getaway would soon turn into a nightmare. The hotel was a charming old building, its creaking wooden floors and antique furnishings giving it a cozy yet slightly eerie atmosphere. But I didn't think much of it. After all, that was what I was looking for, right? I took the key to my room and headed up the narrow staircase to the second floor. My room, number 203, was at the end of a dimly lit corridor. The old-fashioned key turned in the lock and I stepped into the room. I settled in, unpacked my bags, and decided to explore the hotel a bit before dinner. As I roamed the empty hallways, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the old, eerie atmosphere of the place. It was something more sinister that seemed to be lurking just beyond the shadows. I brushed it off, attributing it to my imagination running wild. That evening, I went to the hotel's dining room for dinner. There were only a few other guests, all sitting in isolated corners. The dim candlelight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The staff were polite but reserved, hardly saying a word. As I ate my meal, I overheard snippets of conversation from the table next to mine. A couple was discussing a series of strange incidences in the nearby town, involving sudden disappearances of a few tourists. The story piqued my interest, however. I convinced myself that it was just local gossip, nothing more. I had already come a long way, and I wasn't about to let some rumor ruin my vacation. After dinner, I returned to my room where I decided to unwind with a book. The hours passed, and soon the hotel was almost completely silent, save for the occasional creak of the old floorboards and the distant sound of the wind whistling through the trees. Suddenly, I heard something that made my heart race. It was a soft, scraping noise, like someone trying to pick the lock of my door. Panic surged through me as I realized that someone was trying to break in. I knew I had to act quickly. I tiptoed to the window, heart pounding, and looked out. The moonlight bathed the courtyard below in an eerie glow, and I saw a shadowy figure approaching the entrance to the hotel. It was the same man I had seen at dinner, the one who had been listening to the story about the missing tourists. He was no ordinary guest. He was here for something bad. With trembling hands, I grabbed my phone and dialed the front desk, whispering my predicament to the receptionist. She assured me that she would call the authorities, but it would take some time for them to arrive due to the hotel's remote location. I had to buy time, so I pushed the heavy wooden dresser in front of the door, barricading it as best I could. Then I searched for an escape route. My eyes fell on the balcony just outside the window. I opened it and with a racing heart climbed out onto the narrow ledge. As I crouched there clinging to the cold stone, I heard the man finally break into my room. The sound of shuffling and swearing followed as he realized the door was blocked. My heart pounded as I inched my way along the ledge to a neighboring room. I couldn't afford to make a sound. Inside the neighboring room, I found myself lucky the window wasn't locked. I crawled inside, silently thanking my luck, and dialed the receptionist once more, informing them that I had escaped and was in another room. They told me the authorities were on their way. Huddled in the darkness, I waited, fearing that the man would realize I had fled. Moments later, I heard sirens in the distance, and the wailing of police cars grew closer. The authorities arrived just in time, catching the man in my room attempting to remove the dresser from the door. The police arrested the intruder, and a thorough search of his belongings revealed disturbing evidence linking him to the previous disappearances. It turned out that he had been stalking the hotel, targeting lone travelers like me. I shuddered to think what might have happened if I hadn't acted quickly and escaped. The nightmare ended, but my peaceful getaway had turned into a horrifying experience. The hotel, with its charming yet eerie ambiance, was no longer that haven I had sought. I cut my vacation short, leaving behind the unsettling memories. I learned that sometimes the most idyllic places could hide the darkest secrets. The chilling realization that I had narrowly escaped a predator's clutches haunted me, but it also made me appreciate the value of vigilance and quick thinking. My vacation would forever be marred by that night, but I was grateful that I had survived to tell the tale, a story of terror turned triumph. A sleepover at Kelsey's place was a regular weekend escape for Crystal and her. They'd binge-watch movies, snack on junk food, and share secrets into the early hours. But one night, the ordinary turned into a chilling ordeal that neither of them would ever forget. The girls had settled in Kelsey's living room, surrounded by a cozy mess of blankets and pillows. The TV cast eerie glows as they indulged in a horror movie marathon. Laughter and screams filled the air as the night deepened. Eventually, fatigue started to creep in as they decided to call it a night. Crystal set up camp on the living room couch while Kelsey retreated to her bedroom. The house settled into a quiet hum, interrupted only by the occasional creaks that old houses often made. Crystal had almost drifted off when she heard something that jolted her awake. A faint shuffle, like footsteps in the hallway. Her heart raced, and she strained her ears, praying it was her imagination. But then came another sound, a soft whisper, like hushed voices carried on the wind. Fear slithered down her spine, and she hesitated for a moment before gathering the courage to peer into the darkness. The hallway was dimly lit, but she could make out a shadowy figure moving at the far end. She held her breath, thinking maybe Kelsey was up and about. But then she remembered that Kelsey was in her room, and the realization hit her like a cold wave. Someone was in the house. Panic took over as Crystal's mind raced. She needed to wake Kelsey to get help, but she didn't dare take her eyes off the shadow. She debated whether to scream, but the terror was so suffocating that her voice felt trapped in her throat. Then came the sound that made her heart plummet, a soft thud, like a door closing somewhere in the house. Footsteps were getting closer, slower this time, as if the intruder was deliberately making himself known. Crystal's mind was a whirlwind of dread, her heart pounding in her ears. With trembling fingers, she dug out her phone and texted Kelsey, urging her to wake up and stay quiet. A minute that felt like an eternity passed before she saw Kelsey's bedroom door creak open. Her friend emerged, blurry-eyed and confused, until Crystal's signal for her to listen. The footsteps were unmistakable now, growing louder as they approached the living room. Kelsey's eyes widened in terror as they locked onto the figure moving towards them. They huddled together, their breaths shallow, praying the darkness would hide them from the intruder's gaze. The figure entered the living room, a looming presence against the shadows. Crystal's heart threatened to burst from her chest as their eyes met, cold, calculating eyes that seemed to pierce through them. The intruder didn't speak, didn't move for what felt like an eternity, but the silence was more suffocating than anything. Then, just as suddenly as he appeared, the intruder turned and left the room. Crystal and Kelsey waited, unable to believe their luck. They stayed huddled, holding on to each other, until they were certain he was gone. It felt like hours before they dared to move. When dawn finally broke, the girls cautiously emerged from their hiding place. They found no signs of the intruder, but the memories of that night haunted them. The sleepover tradition continued, but the laughter now held an edge of unease, and the creaks in the old house seemed to tell a different story. a story of a night when the darkness had brought something truly terrifying into their midst. Let me tell you a story that still keeps me up at night. It's about my new neighbor, a guy who seemed like a regular person, but I soon discovered he was anything but. I moved to a quiet suburban neighborhood a few months ago, looking for a fresh start. My new house was charming, and my neighbors seemed friendly enough. That is, except for the guy next door, Mr. Jameson. From the start, there was something off about him. He was an older man, maybe in his 60s, but he moved like he was much younger. He always wore the same black suit and sunglasses, even on cloudy days, and he had a smile that sent chills down my spine. Our first interaction was downright strange. I bumped into him one morning while I was getting the mail. He greeted me with a friendly tone, but there was something cold in his eyes. He started asking personal questions, probing into my life in ways that made me uncomfortable. Over the weeks, things only got weirder. He seemed to know everything about me, things I'd never shared with anyone. He mentioned my childhood friends, my favorite restaurants, even my high school crush. It was as if he'd been spying on me for years. I began to avoid him, but he was always there, lurking in the shadows, watching my every move. Late at night, I'd hear strange noises coming from his house, whispers, laughter, and sometimes cries that scared me. One evening, as I was leaving for work, I noticed Mr. Jameson standing in my driveway. He was holding a photo of my family, a picture I'd never seen before. His voice was icy as he said, "You have a beautiful family. I hope they stay safe." I panicked, rushed into my car, and sped away. I was convinced that this man was dangerous, but I couldn't prove it. I installed security cameras around my property and told the police about my suspicions, but they couldn't find anything to link him to any crimes. One night, as I was reviewing the footage from my cameras, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Mr. Jameson was in my backyard, digging a hole in the dead of night, his suit stained with dirt. I couldn't explain what he was doing, but I knew I had to confront him. I waited until morning, summoned all the courage I had left, and knocked on his door. He answered with the same eerie smile and invited me inside. The house was dark and the air felt heavy with a strange energy. That's when I noticed it, an array of photographs on the walls, each one featuring a different neighbor, all with the same unsettling smile. It was a chilling collection of faces, and I knew I had to get out of there. I ran back to my house and called the police. They arrived in a hurry and searched Mr. Jameson's house. What they found still haunts me till this day. An underground room filled with pictures, articles, and personal items of every neighbor on our street. It was a shrine to us, a testament to his obsession. As they arrested him, I realized how close I had become to becoming a part of his mark. He was arrested, and I never found out his true intentions. But one thing was clear. He was a nightmare living right next door. So remember, sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones who live right under your nose. Trust your instincts and never ignore the signs, no matter how normal someone might seem. You never know what horrors may lurk behind a neighbor's smile.